Welcome to Tablet Live with Ariel Helwani. I'm Jacob Siegel, a senior writer for Tablet Magazine. Very happy to have you here. Just a couple of admin notes. First of all, you're going to see at the bottom of your screen, if you are using Zoom, that there's a Q&A function. Please feel free to type in questions. We're going to save a portion at the end of this talk to ask Ariel, anything that you want to hear from him, hopefully related to something in the general worlds of Jewish life or MMA, but maybe it's outside that. I see what appears to be a take on the Amazing Spider-Man on the wall behind him. So,
Oh, yes.
yeah, and
That's
an
actually not
Expos poster.
Spider-Man.
No?
That's me. Someone made that for me. I'm the Spider-Man in the picture. It's from a
Ah,
fan. I've had a lot of fans make these sort of drawings of me, and they've been very nice. And the other one is, in fact, an Expos painting by my wife of Jeff Reardon, not because we're big Jeff Reardon fans, but because she saw this photo from the early 80s with the beard and the long hair and the colorful uniforms, and she thought it would be a nice painting.
that's awesome. Yeah, your wife's a very talented painter.
Yes.
I half expected you to show up with the patented Ariel Helwani boxing
Ah, yes.
gear on. I was thinking, like, am I going to get the full show here? But not
It is.
today, huh?
I do have it to my right, but I wanted this to be somewhat of a professional
Right,
discussion, so
right.
it was
I
apropos.
guess I probably should have not worn the hat then, but okay.
No, no, the hat works for you, my man.
All right, cool. Thank you. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, you were asking me where I am. I'm saying I'm in Virginia here with my wife's family. For me, it feels like the right place to be. I knew I wanted to get out of New York City. It's nice to be with my in-laws, to have family here to help out. How's this been for you so far? Where did you spend Passover?
I spent it at home. We lived just outside of New York, and we were going to go to Montreal. Unfortunately, we couldn't. So I was looking forward to that. I was looking forward to seeing my parents, my in-laws. They all live in Montreal. My sister, she has a baby. We were all very excited, but unfortunately, we couldn't. So we spent it at home, and we made the best of it. And in fact, you know what? I'm so happy that we're talking about this right now, and it just occurred to me right this moment. Can I tell you something that
Please.
really brightened up my Passover? Like, truly. So I, growing up, I'm the youngest of three boys. My sister's a lot younger than us, and so, like, for the longest time I was the youngest. My dad, my grandfather, I never really led a seder before. I'm usually more of a guest than a
I know
leader.
the feeling.
Yeah. And it occurred to me, like, a week before the first Seder, yeah, we're going to have to kind of do this ourselves. And I have three children, 7, 6, and 3. It's hard to get those kids to sit down for 5 minutes, let alone
Sure.
an hour to go through a book and all this stuff. So I went on Amazon and I looked to buy one of those Passover Haggadahs, the ones that we all grew up with, the yellow ones, the
Sure.
classic one. It's a bit of a nostalgic feel. It just sort of feels right. But none of them were going to arrive in time. So I bought this other Haggadah, just like the first one that I could find that would arrive in time. And lo and behold, it was the tablet Haggadah. And let me just tell you, and this just occurred to me right now, and no one told me to say this. I love that thing. I sat down and read the whole thing both nights, front to back, telling my parents about it, telling my kids stories. I don't know if you were involved in it, but please, whoever was involved in that thing, kudos to you. Tell them that the Helwani family loved it. And that is my new Haggadah. They did a phenomenal job, truly, with it. I adored it.
That's wonderful. I'm involved in the same way you're involved, which is that I appreciate the incredible work that other people at Tablet did. But no, I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues who did all the hard work.
Phenomenal.
Yeah,
Really great.
that's
Especially
awesome.
for this day and age, like, it's an updated version, but it also obviously talks about it was just fun. I mean, like, I was thinking, like, wow, this would be a great Haggadah if you are, doing like a friend's Haggadah and you're all,
Yeah, yeah.
like, it's just whoever came up with that, wow, bravo, because it was really great. And I
I
had
would
no
say,
idea when I bought it. I had no
yeah.
idea it was you guys. I just, like, it was the first one that would arrive before, so I was like, okay, I'll get this one. Then I started to read. I was like, this is a really interesting Haggadah. This is a lot different than my typical Haggadah experience. And then lo and behold, it's a tablet one. So I actually meant to tell you about that, and I'm happy you reminded me of Passover. And
I'm
here,
happy you didn't tell me about it
yeah,
prior to now, and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
happening
yeah.
now. We never discussed this before, but sort of the tablet thing is respectful of tradition, up to date, fun, but authentically Jewish at the same time. Not shallowly Jewish,
Right.
but also able to have fun with it. So that's
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah.
All right,
It was
now
great.
switching gears slightly,
Yes.
um, because Passover is this small communal gathering, right? And we weren't doing that this year because we didn't want to get 10 people in the same room, 20
Right.
people in the same room. And now you have this sport that's built on these live events that's not just the UFC, the company, but the broader sport of mixed martial arts that's sort of gearing up to start putting on events again. Obviously, there were restrictions and new ways of doing things, but this Saturday night is UFC 249, which I have to say is an incredible card. I think I heard you say earlier this week that like Justin Gaethje, Tony Ferguson is just, how can you do better than that? But how did we get from being worried about getting 10 people in a room together for a Seder to having UFC 249 taking place this Saturday night? How does that happen?
Well, I'm not sure those same two conversations happened at the UFC headquarters. I
Likely
don't know if they
not.
were
Yeah.
worried about the Satyrs, but they they were trying to put on an event April 18th. They were trying to make this happen at a Native American casino, a tribal land, so to speak, in Lemoore, California, Tachi Palace. And the UFC honestly never wanted to take a break. They were planning on doing an event. Their last event was March 14th, and then they were planning on doing one March 21st in London. That got canceled, but then they had secured a location at a tribal casino in Oklahoma, Shawnee, Oklahoma, and they were going to do a couple of events there. And then that got thwarted once they reduced it from 50 people to 10 people. And then they set their sights on their next pay-per-view, which is April 18th. But maybe 9 or so days before the event, the governor of California and also Disney got involved and told the UFC to stand down, as Dana White said. So then they quickly turned their attention to their next pay-per-view, which was May 9th. And that was supposed to happen in Brazil. Obviously not happening in Brazil anymore. Now it's happening in Jacksonville. But there's a big difference between this event on May 9th and the event on April 18th. And that is, on April 18th, the California State Athletic Commission was not going to be overseeing that event. They were kind of going rogue. They were kind of doing it on
Mhm.
their own. On May 9th, this Saturday, the Florida State Athletic Commission is overseeing the event. The governor is okay with it. The mayor is okay with it. Disney is okay with it. Everyone is okay with it. And so they have outlined what they are planning to do as far as testing the fighters and ensuring that they are going to be healthy and safe and that there will be social distancing and all that stuff. But we'll only truly know how this whole plan works come, Saturday, Sunday. The fighters are scheduled to arrive tomorrow, Wednesday. And then I'm curious to talk to them about how it went and if they felt safe. And for the most part, the fighters are all on board with this. They want to fight. They want to get paid. If they don't fight, they don't get paid. But I'm really curious to see how they pull it off. But the UFC, the event on Saturday is going to happen, barring an unforeseen turn of events. And I would be shocked if it doesn't happen at this point. And they've been determined from the get-go to be rolling along, to be the only game in town. And I'm really curious to see how they pull that off.
It's a very UFC thing, right? It's like a very Dana White thing for the whole country to be shut down and to say, no, no, no,
Huh.
we're going to make this happen. Uh, we said we were going to do it, and we're going to do it, and we'll find a way. And if it's a fight island, it'll be a fight island. And if it's getting the Florida Commission to go along, it's the Florida Commission. It does sort of speak to the kind of singular, like never take no for an answer attitude that has sort of distinguished the UFC. And frankly, I've been surprised by how muted the criticism has been. I thought that there would be more pushback, and I haven't seen that much. Is that your read on it also?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's a mixture of a few things. Number one, the fans really miss it, so you're not going to get much pushback from them. I think a lot of media misses it. And, to be honest, when I think about this situation, I think of a famous line uttered by the late, great head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, Dennis Green, after a Monday Night Football game against the Chicago Bears, was all fired up. He showed up to the post-game press conference and he said, and they lost a nail biter, and they were a horrible team, and the Bears were one of the best teams in the league. And he said, they are who we thought they were. And I'm reminded of that quote when I talk about this situation and perhaps the lack of criticism. And that's because, the fight game is sort of viewed through a different lens, and there's different expectations and there's different standards. It's not the NBA, it's not the NFL, it's not the NHL, it's not Major League Baseball. And so I think there's a lot of people like you who say, this is quintessential Dana White. This is cage fighting. This is mixed martial arts. This is the fight game. Oh, who's the next promoter that's going to do something? Oh, look, Vince McMahon has been doing everything since
Right.
since this all started. He hasn't stopped. And so I think that people just sort of, view them in a different light, and aren't all that surprised when they march to the beat of their own drum.
Have you heard anything from fighters about, what it's like to train right now? I mean, presumably it's harder to get sparring partners, or you sort of have less access to the general roster of, maybe instead of having like a strength and conditioning coach, a head coach, and a nutritionist, now you're only in contact with one guy, or has it been less disrupted than that picture suggests?
Well, for some guys it's been a little tricky, but for the most part, I think the fighters have been a little blissfully ignorant to the whole thing. I mean, they're posting things on their photos, videos on their social media, Instagram, of them all together, hugging each other, taking photos, training and whatnot, and
Right.
getting haircuts and getting ready for fight week. It's like, if you would look at just their social media, you would have no idea that this is going on, to be honest with you. And I'm not sure if that's the best look, but they have to prepare for these fights. And if they're going to fight and they're going to get paid to fight, and there's a lot at stake as far as their careers are concerned, they're going to try to do as much as possible. And so, um, I have heard from a couple of fighters who were frustrated about the situation, but to be honest, 99.9% of the fighters that I've talked to have said, sign me up. Where do I, how do I get on one of these cards? Who can I fight? Who's available? And it's going to get tricky if the travel restrictions continue, because, there's only so many American-based fighters out there. And so, what happens come July if you still can't travel to the United States? How are they going to get these fighters over here? I'm really curious to see how that pans out. But no, the fighters, they all want to fight. They're all very eager to fight. And even though it might not be the most ideal set of circumstances, they are all very happy that the UFC is, at least for
Right.
right this moment, the only game in town, because they all want to get paid.
It comes back to your last point, in a sense, right? Like, it's the fight game. These are not people who are dispositionally or by habit overly concerned with preserving their physical health above all other priorities. Like,
Well,
it's not that
I don't want to
shy.
suggest that they don't care, but I just think that the fight game is viewed a little differently to
Of
the outside
course.
world.
I think they have a different, their threshold for what kind of risk they're willing to accept is not an accountant's threshold, and it's not a journalist's threshold either. So it depends on the kind of accountant, let's say. But
Yeah, and also, Dana White is an owner. He's not a commissioner. He's
right,
not, like a Roger Goodell or an Adam Silver. He doesn't have to answer to a fighters association. He doesn't have to answer to a board of governors. He doesn't have to answer to a group of owners. So if he wants to do something, he could essentially do it now. He has, investors now. The landscape has changed once they sold the company, but for the most part, like, he's pretty influential within the company. And so
right.
he can make these sort of things happen, as opposed to these other leagues who have to go through a litany of steps in order to reopen their doors.
Right. And just something you've covered in the past, and seems to have sort of, the peak interest in it has died down, but fighters organizations have historically just never been able to really substantially, collectively influence the UFC brass. Like, there have been all these attempts. And interestingly enough, Andrew Yang, one of the candidates for president briefly on the Democratic ticket, was somebody who talked about this. So it gave it some political notice also. But it's not an organization that's had laws like boxing has had certain laws passed. And it's been, generally speaking, these fighters organizations have gotten a lot of press initially and then seem to have sort of died out without making much impact.
Yeah, there have been efforts. The most serious one was probably 2016. There were a couple groups, but The thing is, as far as UFC fighters are concerned, there's almost like three tiers. There's the ones who just get signed and they're making very little for the most part. They're usually making 10 and 10, which means 10,000 to show and
Right.
10,000 to win a fight. And a lot of them are just happy to be there. They've worked so hard, they've gotten no money along the way. Now they've made it to the show, so they don't want to rock the boat. And then you got that second tier of guy who or female who is on the verge of maybe a big payday, a big title fight, a huge fight. This is not the time to rock the boat. I just had to suffer through 10 and 10s for a while. Now I'm, on the verge of being contender. It's tough to rock the boat then. And then you've got, the 5% at the very, very top who are making a ton of money and they finally made it. And, maybe the line of thinking is, this is not the time to rock the boat because I finally made it. So, all that to say, at this point, there hasn't really been a big push to make this happen. Outside people have tried to make it happen, but the fighters really haven't taken to it. And it seemed like for a while, the media was talking about it more than the fighters
Right.
wanted us to talk about it. And so there was a thought process at the beginning of this pandemic where people were thinking, such as myself, maybe this will be the catalyst, right? To
Yeah.
galvanize them. And I've heard nothing of that sort.
So let me just tell the people who are listening, thanks for being here again. For more on Tablet Magazine, you can check us out at tabletmag.com. You can also search for the Tablet Haggadah that Ariel mentioned earlier, and you can find one of those for next year. I see we've got one question so far. Feel free to ask questions. We'll save the last 10 to 15 minutes for those. So anything you want to ask Ariel about, you can type those into the Q&A portion. Now, Ariel, you were just talking about the top, the kind of tiered structure of MMA and the top 5%. Let me shift for a second to the top 1% of the top 1%, which is Conor McGregor, and how he has come out since the coronavirus. I think it's sort of interesting how dramatic this guy's public image, how all over the place his public image is, and his ability to kind of, reshape his public persona is, I find it very impressive. He'll do something unbelievably kind of courageous. And I don't just mean in the cage. I mean, like, I think about after the loss to Nate Diaz, the way that he carried himself, which really sort of, I think, created a kind of template for what it meant to be, for how fighters dealt with losses. I think of Dominic Cruz after that and the way Cruz dealt with his loss to Cody Garbrandt. But really, to me, the first guy to do that in the modern era, to be so public and so kind of forthright and willing to talk about his loss immediately afterwards in a calm and dispassionate way, is McGregor. Then he'll go and throw a hand truck through a window at Khabib. Then he'll go punch an old guy in a bar. And, I follow the Reddit MMA threads because I have too much time, I guess. But I see sort of my sense of, like, the average MMA fan is where the kind of temperature of Reddit is at any given time. And they love him one day, they hate him the next day. But McGregor seems to have this incredible ability to never be down for the count, even in terms of how people think of him. All of that is the backdrop to how he's emerged in Ireland. Now, granted, he had this great win over Cerrone, even as short as it was, but he sort of made a very impassioned early speech on behalf of Irish public healthcare workers, and really, like, a rousing and inspiring speech, I thought. What do you make of this? Is he a good guy again? Do people like him again?
Well, it was almost presidential the way he gave those speeches, right? Like, he took
Yeah.
this upon himself. I think that Connor has really has really risen to the occasion in this 2-month period, because not only has he put out those videos, but he's also donated a bunch of times to local hospitals. Last week visited a children's hospital in his hometown of Crumlin. On the one hand, you have a situation where you have John Jones, who's telling people to stay at home early on, and then a week later he gets arrested. And you kind of start to wonder in that moment. A lot of these fighters are at home; they can't train. Are they going to go stir crazy? Are they going to do dumb things to get them in trouble. You have a situation like Conor, who's had his issues in the past, and at least, from the outside looking in, he has really done a great job of being a leader, of giving people hope, of trying to guide his country in one way or the other, being very active and vocal about the issues, especially early on in this process. So I give him a lot of credit. And you're right, he had a nightmarish 2019. He was becoming the stereotype for the fighter who got it all and then lost it all. And it seemed like the fans in Ireland were starting to turn on him. And then he comes back against Cerrone, and he couldn't have handled that fight week any better. In the midst of a lot of scrutiny and people wondering if he's truly back and all this stuff, if he can, get back to his old self, gets that win, handles everything great from start to finish. There's no controversy. And this was shaping up to be a phenomenal year for him, a huge year for him, where he was going to hopefully fight 3 times at minimum. And his next fight was going to be July 11th. So thus far, he hasn't missed out on a fight just yet. I wonder if it's going to be a little tough to get him back in there, especially because he lives in Ireland. But yeah, I would say 2020 thus far for Conor has been a really good year for him. And I just hope that he can stay on this path because, as you alluded to, he is so influential and he is beloved by so many people. And for some reason, people are willing to forget about some of his transgressions because he is so captivating at times, not to excuse some of the things that he has done, but you saw the reaction to his return. It was gigantic. People loved him all over again. So hopefully we'll get to see him at least one more time this year. And I hope for his sake that he's able to stay on this path because he's been doing great as of late.
Yeah, not to be too grandiose about it, but Tolstoy has this idea of the world historical figure, comes up in philosophy also, but somebody who kind of stands in the currents of their time and has a special connection to that moment, that they're a part of that historical moment. And again, not to be too grandiose about a prize fighter, but Conor has a kind of world historical air to him. There's really something larger than life about the guy, whereas Jones, as incredible a fighter as he is, it's like there's a more, for me, a tragic quality to Jones, where there's like some pathological inability to get past this self-destructive thing, whereas Conor never kind of goes so far that you don't think there's still a chance he can triumph over that in some way. I can't think of too many people in the modern era who I would compare to Conor in that way, and really just how large a figure he cuts. It feels to me quite unique. Now, let's say he does come back sometime in the next 6 months and is able to make a fight and can travel, or they figure it out. Who do you see as the most likely matchups for him?
I mean, it's tough because we're playing with a different deck of cards now, but the original plan was him fighting Justin Gaethje on July 11th, and now Gaethje, of course, is fighting this weekend against Tony Ferguson. If Gaethje wins that fight, would he get the Conor fight? Possible, but you could also make a very strong case for him fighting Khabib Nurmagomedov because he'd be the interim champion. So then maybe Ferguson, who loses that fight, would fight Conor. Will there be a lot of interest in a fight where a guy just, lost and then is now fighting Conor? Because I think people want to see Conor against someone who's been on a roll. And then there's always the Nate Diaz factor, right? Their first 2 fights were classics. Yeah, Nate is coming off a loss, but it's back in November and it was somewhat unceremonious with the cut, the doctor stoppage. That's an easy one that would do very well, with very little promotion, right? Because the history sells itself. So I think it's, and then of course, let's just say normalcy resumes and in October, they could start having people flying from everywhere and they can hold events in Las Vegas. It's going to be tough to dismiss and ignore the allure of Conor versus Khabib too. Not saying that that's the fight that is deserving, not saying that he's done enough to get that fight because it's just been 1 win over Donald Cerrone, but that fight would be, as far as revenue, the biggest in UFC history without a doubt. And so do they just try to, hot shot that one, so to speak, and make that rematch right away? I wouldn't, rule that out as well. So probably a combination of Khabib, Gaethje, Ferguson, or Nate Diaz. I'd say one of those 4 guys are probably, the best bet. But I know that's not really whittling it down. It's just so hard to predict at this point.
Yeah, but I take it you don't buy the kind of Khabib camp line that like Khabib's father says no way, and so therefore it's really never going to
10
happen.
fights, all this
Yeah,
stuff. No, no. I mean, look, if Khabib is really being honest with himself, he would tell you that beating Conor and the build up to that fight did wonders for his life and his career. It turned him into this international megastar. And so, I'm sure he thinks that it's a fair, I don't want to say easy matchup, but that he has his number, that he's a better fighter than him. Look
right.
how their first fight went, regardless of some of the things that Conor brought up afterwards. And he could stand to make a hell of a lot of money if he takes that fight again. So I don't buy for a second that they'll. I mean, it started with 10, and then it started. You got to win one fight, and I'm not going to fight in Vegas, and then maybe I'll fight in Vegas. It's just all posturing.
Yeah. So non-MMA related question. I know you're from not Montreal, but right outside of Montreal,
No,
right?
Montreal.
Okay, I thought the neighborhood you had mentioned was just outside the actual city lines.
Well, like it's, I mean, the neighborhood that I grew up in is called Town of Mount Royal, but it's in the city of Montreal. That
So
makes sense.
here's a Montreal question. Now, the two famous bagel spots are Saint Viateur and Fairmont. Is that right?
Look at that accent. Wow, that's impressive.
Not
Yes.
bad.
Yeah.
I made it all the way to sixth grade with
Okay.
French,
Yeah.
and no further than sixth grade, but that's something, right? Saint Viateur, Fairmont. Which do you take?
Oh, Saint Viateur, 100%.
Okay, and you take it sesame, plain, cream
Sesame,
cheese.
sesame, cream cheese lox.
Okay, that's where you go wrong. I'm sorry to say. I believe that the Montreal bagel is a fine bagel, an excellent bagel even, but it doesn't take lox is the problem. It's a bit too sweet. Like a New York bagel is made for lox, right?
Wow, this
Yeah.
is quite the hot take right here.
You want the hotter take?
Yeah.
The real thing in Montreal is not the bagel. It's Schwartz's.
Okay. First of all, that's not a hot take.
Is that not a hot take?
Not at all.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
Schwartz's was world renowned. Are you kidding? I knew that what you were about to say before you even said it.
Interesting. I'm that predictable. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that people sort of thought like, oh, the Montreal thing is really, we do a bagel as well as anybody. But I would say
the smoked meat.
the smoked meat is as good as anything you'll find
Yeah.
anywhere in the world, as far
And
as
you can't really get it here in the United States. My friends, I don't know if we talked about them last time, but my friends have a restaurant in New York City, Mile End, and Black Seed
I've been
Bagel.
there, yeah.
Yeah, and so they do smoked meat, kind of patterning. No, patterning. What am I saying? Patterning?
Process.
No, like when you copy someone. Patterning. No, patterning. Patterning, is that the word?
I don't think that's the word, but they copy the smoke.
Yes.
Meat process. Yeah.
I just had like a mental lapse there. But anyway,
I can't get it either, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. There's something about that. I mean, I don't know what it is about that smoked meat. I don't know what, and I don't know. Have you been to Schwartz's?
I have been to Schwartz's.
Yeah, it's not exactly the nicest restaurant of all time.
I love it.
There's just something about it, right?
Totally. No, that's my kind of place. I actually worked at the Second Avenue Deli in New York as a waiter.
No way.
Briefly. I shouldn't even
love
say
that
a waiter.
Place.
It was incredible. I worked at the original location on Second Avenue before I moved uptown. And it was a great experience. I wasn't even a waiter, actually. I was a runner. So I didn't take orders. I just brought the food out.
Wow.
Maybe I got to waiter eventually. But I know great New York. I would say smoked meat you could describe as somewhere in between corned beef and pastrami.
Yeah.
Like, it's not quite as briny as corned beef, but it's not as smoky as pastrami. It's somewhere in between. But yeah, the Schwartz's stands up to anything, I think. Really fantastic. So speaking of Montreal, you have a real, like, historic at this point MMA scene in Montreal, also a good boxing scene in Montreal. Are you hearing anything from the TriStar camp? Sort of what's going on? Is George St. Pierre, is he done? Is there ever a possibility of him coming back?
I actually spoke to George 2 weeks ago, maybe.
Was he on the show?
Now. Yeah, I spoke to him. It was a great
awesome
conversation. 1 hour conversation. It was really nice to catch up with him. And it sounds like, he will never, at least not right now, say the R word. But the only fight that really interests him is that Khabib fight. And it sounds like the UFC isn't all that interested in making that fight happen. And He proposed the idea of maybe doing a catch weight, and they don't like the idea of him coming back, beating Khabib, and then leaving.
Right.
Now there's no money to be made off the guy who beat Khabib, and there's a lot of money to be made off that guy because Khabib is undefeated. So I get it from their perspective, although I would love to see that fight, especially at 165. The guy is in phenomenal shape. It's not like he's sitting at home eating poutine. He's an incredible athlete. He's a freak. And so if they come to him in a year and say, hey, are you interested? I wouldn't necessarily rule it out, but I'm not holding my breath for him to return anytime soon. He seems really happy. It's really interesting talking to him about the pre-fight nerves. Like, he really hated fighting. Like it was just a total strain on him and a real burden on his life. And so it seems like he's really enjoying not having to deal with that right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. He said something on Joe Rogan's podcast once that was like, the greatest thrill in my life is something like, the only things that'll get him out of bed are like women, dinosaurs, and fighting another man.
Jacob, he said that on my show.
Oh shit, I'm sorry.
I mean,
man.
Really?
That's shameful.
Oh,
Shameful.
Gosh. I mean, here you are.
Forget about it. He said that on your show.
Thank you.
Yeah, and your show, by the way, since I screwed that up, I'll make a point of saying this. I had really dug the stuff with Chael, and I'm also really loving Cormier. To me, is like Daniel Cormier, who, I don't know exactly where he stands right now in relation to the UFC, but he'll go down as one of the great light heavyweights and one of the great heavyweights, and is now a co-host of yours. He's such a good broadcaster. It's he has a real sort of natural ability, and I think that the chemistry between you guys, not to make it sound more romantic than it is, but it's great. I
appreciate that. I really enjoyed doing it. The one thing about that show that I've done for so long, for 11 years, I enjoy it, but I have to book that whole darn thing myself. So I got to reach out to the fighters and all that stuff. And sometimes it becomes a little bit of a strain. And, the UFC machine never stops. There's 42 events a year. Those 10 non-weekends are sprinkled throughout the year. So it's not like there's an off season. And so it's not like I've been sitting back and, putting my feet up over the last 2 months, but I used it as an opportunity to maybe try a few new things and give the people a bit of a different look, a bit of a different feel. And the reaction to the Cormier show has been really good. So I hope that I can continue it. It's not like we're not going back to work on Monday just because the UFC is doing an event on Saturday. It's not like I'll be back in my studio. I haven't been given that indication, but I would really love to continue that because it almost feels like two buds just talking and laughing.
I hope you do. Yeah. It's like a real sort of more of a hangout vibe. I love Chael. Chael is a legend, but Chael is
it's a different feel.
It's a different feel. Chael is so singularly Chael. He's incredible. But the Cormier thing is like, you could sort of imagine yourself being part of that conversation. Whereas with Chael, you're like gazing in wonder at, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you.
And so, no, I like them both. Don't get me wrong, but I really have liked the stuff with Cormier. And
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to go check out that most recent GSP interview because now I realize that one of my favorite clips of all time was one of your previous GSP
interviews. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so listen, speaking of Cormier, there are certain fighters, right, like Stipe Miocic, who is the current heavyweight champion and who presumably is Cormier's next fight, who have been sort of more reluctant in terms of their willingness to fight, right? And it brings up this interesting ambiguity in terms of the relationship between the fighters and the UFC. Again, the UFC can't force Stipe to fight, but how do you see it going with somebody like Stipe who's been more resistant? Do they just wait him out and see how it goes?
No, they wanted that fight, the Cormier Stipe 3 fight, to happen in early August. The plan was for that to happen on August 1st in the Bay Area, but obviously plans change a little bit. But they would like to have Cormier fight in the summertime, and he would like to fight because, of course, he said on multiple occasions now wants one more fight and then he wants to retire. He wants to move on with his life. Stipe had a very good excuse. He had the eye injury, he had eye surgery, he had to recover from that, and they last fought in August. So I didn't think that there was any real pressure on him to come back in March or April, etc. Now he's been working as a firefighter, and he has to be commended for that, especially during these times. He's a part-time firefighter, and I think that come, you know, May, June, they're really going to try to push for him to fight on that August card or sometime in that time frame, because that's the biggest fight that can happen right now at heavyweight. And there's a big heavyweight fight happening on Saturday between Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Francis Ngannou, and the hope is that the winner of that fight would fight the winner of the Miocic Cormier fight. So you kind of have to keep the train rolling along. So it's going to be interesting, if there is some resistance there. They haven't really gone into the serious negotiations, but if there is resistance there, what are they going to do? Are they going to try to do an interim title fight, threaten to strip him, all that stuff? I hope that's not the case. I hope we get that Cormier Miocic fight, because the first two were a lot of fun. But
phenomenal.
Yeah, I think in the end he will fight. And I think he was planning on fighting this summer. So I don't think it will come to something like that. And it will be unfortunate. Like if DC, and I agree with you, he's been one of the great fighters in the history of the sport. If his career ends in an empty arena, I feel like that would be a bummer, but he doesn't seem to care. He just wants that one last fight. He wants to right the wrong of the last fight and then sail off into the sunset, so to speak. So I hope they make it happen, because it's a great fight.
Between you and me, and feel free to mention this to DC if you want, I would much rather see him go out on a Stipe fight, however it happens, than on a Jones 3, which I know he's talked about, but I don't want to see, not because I don't think he's competitive. I think he's absolutely competitive, but it's just like, I don't know. There's something about that feels unsavory at this point, partly because of Jones's actions. There's only so much attention I want to give to Jones, especially like when he's competing with DC, whereas with Stipe, it just feels like a better kind of note for him to end his career on, I guess is what I would say. But
yeah, no, I
yeah,
agree. The trilogy, Jones and DC bring out the best and worst in each other, right? And so I don't know if people want that at this point. The second fight was heartbreaking, the way it ended with him in the cage crying. And so this is perfect. He always should have been a heavyweight. He
yeah,
only moved down to light heavyweight because his friend Cain Velasquez was the heavyweight champion. So that tells you the kind of person that he is. He never wanted to fight him. And then he moves up and he beats the heavyweight champ, the winningest heavyweight champ of all time. And he was winning that fight. Credit to Stipe and his team for adjusting and then
yeah,
starting to attack the body in the later rounds. And then he won fair and square. But the third fight after the first two, I mean, how many times you get, a legit trilogy for the heavyweight title 3 times? You've had Kane and JDS, but after that first one, it wasn't very competitive. So I'd love to see it. And, there's something bigger, imagine they stripped Stipe and then they did DC versus Francis or Jairzinho. It just wouldn't feel the same, right? I mean, I feel like he deserves that big fight in his last fight.
yeah, I'm with you. And honestly, like the stripping guys of titles is lame to me anyway, and I wish
Yeah.
they would stop doing that. So listen, we've got about 15 minutes left, and I want to get to some questions. So I see we've got a bunch in the Q&A. Thank you, anybody else who's here. This is Jacob Siegel from Tablet Magazine with Ariel Helwani of ESPN, and we are talking MMA, Montreal, smoked meats, all the important things. So as we're looking forward, we're talking about kind of immediate fights or the next steps, but big picture, right? Obviously, the UFC is able to still put on events. And some of that is probably the singular character of the UFC, but some of that is they're just looking for opportunities, maybe where other places are more risk averse at the moment. Over the next, let's say, year, even 5 years, what indications are you getting of, structural changes in live sporting events? Like airlines, right, are saying that they're not going to book flights in the same way anymore. And that's both out of safety considerations and I think also them appreciating that the demand won't be there, that people don't want to sit that close to each other anymore. What are you seeing in terms of the future of live sporting events of the kind that make MMA so special?
Well, I can speak to MMA in particular, and Dana White has said recently that he's not planning to have a live gate for a very long time, and they're very lucky that they have this UFC Apex building that they built on their headquarters in Las Vegas. It's a beautiful mini arena, and their hope is that they can, at some point, they're hoping in June start to hold the majority of their events there. The problem is right now the Nevada State Athletic Commission isn't, regulating events. Maybe that changes in a month, but if that could happen, that would be a godsend for them because it would be very cheap. They've got all the hotels, they've got all the infrastructure. It's right on their headquarters. I mean, it couldn't be more convenient. So I suspect that we're going to see that, and it's also built to not have an audience. There's not like a bunch of empty seats, so it won't look weird. They do the Dana White Contender Series shows there, and honestly, MMA fans are sort of accustomed to watching fights without an audience because the Ultimate Fighter for so many years was just in a warehouse. Bellator, who's the number 2 promotion in the world, owned by Viacom, their president Scott Coker has talked about putting on events in a like a soundstage lot in Los Angeles. Viacom obviously has a ton of those, so that could be a thing. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the rest of the year just has events like this. I spoke to Bob Arum, the founder and CEO of Top Rank boxing promoter, last week, and he told me that they're hopeful that maybe they could return in the summer, but they've got this big fight between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, the trilogy that they wanted to do on July 18th, and then they pushed it back to October. And now they're talking November, December, because he's hopeful that in November and December we'll be able to have events with maybe not 20,000 people, but maybe 5 to 10,000 people. And at
Yeah.
least, you make some money off that. The problem is some of those fights, and it's the same problem with Conor McGregor, those draw a gigantic gate, like Conor's 17 million, all that stuff. So you're losing a lot of money by giving that away in an empty arena. So I think that some of those big names will wait until the back end of the year to see how this plays out, hoping that, some fans will be allowed in and they'll be able to charge for tickets.
Yeah, that's interesting because it could just be marginal increases, right? Like you might not get back, even if you wait it out. It might just be that the world has changed fundamentally and that you're not going to fill all 25,000 seats. But if you wait 6 months, you could get from 5,000 to 10,000, something like that. It just seems like there's a lot of unknowns at this point.
Yeah, so many unknowns. Obviously, basketball, there's been some talk. Baseball, there's been some talk. But, I mean, look how much has changed in the last 2 months. So I just pray that we'll sort of get back to normalcy within the next 2 months.
So let me go through some of these questions. We got some good ones here. Julian Murray wants to know, Ariel, about the WME IMG's recent financial problems and what that could mean for the UFC long term. You have any insights into that?
Well, I know. I mean, I've read the stuff that's out there. I know that no one at the UFC has been furloughed or let go, so that's good for them. Obviously, when the UFC was sold in 2016 for $4.025 billion, no one showed up with a check for $4 billion, and
Right.
so there's a lot of there's a lot of loans, debt, financing, all that stuff, right? And so they have bills to pay, and they stand to make a lot of money from these events, and that's why they want to put on all the pay-per-views, because those are the ones that they make the most money off of. So I think it's important for them, who are owned, the majority owner is Endeavor. The UFC is one of those, there's not a lot of movies being shot now, TV shows, whatever the case is. The UFC is one of the few industries, MMA, one of the few industries that it can actually start to make some money now. So they're crucially important, I think, for their business. But I'm not hearing that, they're in trouble or that they're going to start letting people go and whatnot. But, I think that part of the reason why Dana White wanted to put on this event, part of it is probably a little bit of ego and to say that we were the first and we're going to keep this going, and, we're going to be the ones to bring some normalcy back. But obviously it's economics as well. It's money. They stand to make a lot of money. They don't make money if they put on these events, and it's important for their business and for their parent company that they hold these events. So I think
Yeah.
that's definitely part of the reason as well. No doubt about it.
Okay, we got one more question from Julian about Paulo Costa trying to pick a fight with Chael last night. Now, I don't know about this.
I didn't see that.
This must be a Twitter beef. All right, sorry, Julian, we don't know, but
Yeah, that's really inside baseball. I missed
yeah.
that one.
Is Paulo Costa? I didn't think he was like a smack talker in that way, but
Yeah, I
maybe I'm
feel like
wrong.
that could be maybe just a rib, if you will, or a joke. I just spoke to Chael. We just taped our show, and that did not come up. So I'm
Okay.
surprised. I'll look
All right.
into it
Well,
though.
we'll see what happens. I mean,
Yeah.
Chael is certainly somebody who doesn't tend to stay silent in such
Yeah, I don't think he's
scenarios.
looking for that fight, but maybe I'm wrong.
Okay. I think this is from Blucher, um, who is a longtime listener, I think they say. I think Jones is a better fighter at heavyweight. Would Jones ever fight him at heavyweight? I guess it
Cormier.
won't matter if Cormier retires. Yeah, I guess he's talking about Cormier. Would
I'm
Jones
surprised.
go up?
I'm surprised to hear him say that Jones is a better fighter at heavyweight because he's never fought at heavyweight. So how do you actually know?
It's a good question, though. I have heard people speculate that, like, given his frame
Yeah,
and
but honestly, I don't subscribe to that anymore. First of all, his weight cuts have been really easy for him, and after his last couple of performances against Dominic Reyes, I thought Dominic won that fight
yeah, I
against Diego
totally agree.
Santos.
Yeah,
I thought Jones won that fight, but still, like, so you want him to go up there against the big boys at heavyweight? I just don't see that. Like, stick at 205 and beat those guys. I mean, first of all, I want to see the Reyes rematch right
agreed.
away. I want to see the Jan Blachowicz fight. I'm interested in that. There's enough going on right now at 205 to where I don't feel like a lot of people are clamoring. And then eventually, who knows, maybe if he's still the champion, Israel Adesanya moves up from 185 to 205. So this push to have Jones fight at heavyweight to me is not really a thing anymore, especially after the last fight.
It was such a good year for Israel, and I feel like he's losing some momentum now, just because of the kind
Well,
of
he did fight March 7th, and obviously that wasn't a well-received fight. But like
yeah.
he was the last one. That was the last event with fans in attendance.
I didn't blame him for that, but yeah,
No,
right. But
so it hasn't been that long.
he had a hell of a year.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like some really
Fighter of the year candidate. It came down really
yeah
to him and Jorge Masvidal.
another incredible year.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I heard you say something about Masvidal that I thought captured it, but yeah, it was just like his kind of arc was so incredible, to have remade himself by like his own force of will to say, I
Incredible.
haven't been making the most of this. I'm going to change it. It's inspiring.
Oh yeah, one of the best stories that I've ever come across. 17 years in the game, and then all of a sudden he has a year like that. I mean, could you imagine in the NBA or Major League Baseball, a
Yeah,
17-year vet turning into like the MVP?
totally,
Absurd.
totally. It makes me think for a second. We were just talking about Israel Adesanya. So there's this announcement that Robert Whitaker decided to essentially take a break from training, I think, and from
Yeah, he
fighting.
burnt out.
He just burnt out, and I can't think of anybody else. There have been guys have walked away for personal reasons, but this seems to me like a kind of first. And he didn't have to be honest about it, right? He could have sort of made up an excuse or alluded to something else. What do you think about the way
Oh,
this has played out?
I loved it. I love it. I was talking about this on Ariel and the Bad Guy last week. I'm watching this Last Dance documentary series about the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. And one of the things that has really stood out to me while watching that is the level of honesty between the athletes and even the management and the media. And I think that they felt that they could be honest like that and so unfiltered because there weren't these, 24/7 debate shows and media, social media, where everything is scrutinized and twisted and turned and debated and all this stuff. And so you don't have to worry about those kind of repercussions. In MMA, in our sport, we're not quite there just yet where things like this, break through and get talked about 24/7. And so I think the fighters feel very comfortable speaking up like this. They feel like they won't get the kind of blowback that can you imagine if Kevin Durant said that he was burnt
Yeah,
out? Could you
right.
imagine if LeBron said that?
Yeah,
You don't have to worry about that sort of thing in MMA. So you get that from Robert Whitaker. You get Donald Cerrone saying he didn't show up against against Conor McGregor in that fight back in January, and I appreciate that. But I also think it speaks to the fact that we're not quite there yet, right? Because I think if any other pro athlete would say that from the four major sports, they would be, vilified. You burnt out, you're making money, all that stuff. So I really appreciate Robert's honesty. And I'm glad to hear that he's doing well. And he's always been honest. He's talked about mental health issues and feeling depressed. And, I thought he was coming back maybe a little too soon after the loss to Israel. Now he appears to be in great spirits and in a really good place. But yeah, I mean, that's that's why I love covering the sport, because of people like Robert who are just so brutally honest, and they don't sugarcoat things. They don't give you the stock answers, the cliches. They tell it like it is, good or bad.
I feel like one of the differences, if you compare MMA to, say, basketball, or a Whitaker to a Durant or something like that, is that the fact that they're putting it all on the line, and that that creates a kind of personal connection between fans and fighters that's maybe a bit different, and that creates a space for like a degree of allowing for a vulnerability or something like that. Maybe that's
That's very
um,
deep of you. Wow.
thank you. So speaking of deep, I'll bring this up as a note to end on. You started off by saying that you felt like leading your family's Seder this year, that it was a kind of change, like, if I understood you correctly, because I know I felt some of this myself, though. I had a Seder at my in-laws' house in Virginia. We did a socially distanced Seder, actually, because we were quarantining in their house.
Oh, wow.
So we had, my in-laws were at the dinner table. Then they put a table in front of the front door that my
Oh my
wife and I
gosh.
sat at, and the Seder plate was on the floor between us,
Oh
because
my gosh.
we were literally quarantining inside their house. But there is a kind of a break in the communal bonds that's occurred now. If you're an observant Jew, it's a lot tougher to have a minyan right now. There are things you can do. You can put on tefillin. There are other things that are harder to do now, right? Or that you ought to at least be more cautious about. How's that impacting you? I mean, you're distant from your family. What's different about Jewish life for you right now?
Well, I'm still putting on my tefillin every morning, and I actually have enjoyed it because my son, he brought home his siddur from school, and they have their prayers, and we've been doing them from time to time. Sometimes it's hard to get them to do it, but we've been doing it. Typically I'll say like the Modeh and the Shema and Amidah, but with him I'll do like Adon Olam and Aleinu and things like that, and so it's been nice. And we don't right now go to synagogue every Saturday or every Friday. I just put my tefillin in the mornings. I used to go a lot more to synagogue back when I was younger, but the part that I really miss, obviously, is seeing my parents. Like Passover, to me, probably my favorite holiday, because it's the beginning of spring. The NBA playoffs are starting, Major League Baseball, NCAA championship. Like I just have really good memories of Passover. The break comes at a good time in the school year, and I was bummed to miss out on that this year, and to to see my parents. It's a little sad, doing like seders via Zoom and all that, and my parents are alone in Montreal, and my wife's parents, they're alone at home, so it's not a great feeling. But I've been trying to take the approach of, hey, as long as we are healthy, as long as we're not in need in a hospital or something like that, there's nothing to complain about. This is fine. Obviously I'm not in a studio or anything like that, but I feel like I haven't missed a beat as far as work, and I'm proud of that. And as long as my parents and my in-laws and everyone who's part of my family is okay, hopefully next year we'll be at a Seder table reminiscing about how different this all was, but that we survived and that life is back to normal. That's my hope, at least.
Next year in Montreal, I
Yes.
think. Something
Amen.
like that, right?
Amen.
Ariel, this has been fantastic. Anything coming up that you want to let people know about?
No, just the same coverage. Got a lot for 249 on Saturday. Obviously, a 3-hour radio show and pre-fight show and all that stuff. I tweet all that stuff out and let people know. So I appreciate you guys. And again, that Haggadah, if you're out there, I highly recommend it. It's great for next year. And by the way, not even for next year. Just read it. It's a great book.
Anytime. Yeah.
Yeah, it's honestly a great book. So kudos to everyone involved.
Thanks so much. And thank you for coming on. And yeah, I know how much you tweet and how much content you put out, because I'm there absorbing it and appreciating it. Okay,
Thank you.
thanks to everybody else. Thank you, Ariel.
Have a
Take
good one.
care. You
Take care.
too.
Bye-bye.
Signing off here.